So in this presentation, we discuss Marcel Junod's The First Atom Bomb. Marcel Junod was a famous Swiss doctor. He was born in 1904 and died in 1961. Well, he was a famous Swiss doctor who won international acclaim. He was internationally famous for his humanitarian services. He has served as a delegate of the International Committee of the Red Cross, the ICRC, during the Second World War. He visited prisoners of war in different parts of the world. He arrived in Tokyo on the 9th of August 1945. Well, remember, Hiroshima was bombed on the 6th of August and Nagasaki on the 9th of August 1945. And remember, Junod was the first foreign doctor to reach Hiroshima after it was bombed by the American planes. And here's a summary of Junod's description. Well, here the first section. 3 weeks had passed since the 2 atomic bombs had been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. For various reasons, the Japanese maintained a complete silence. When a tragedy occurs, nobody speaks, nobody dares to speak. They just look at each other. So they maintained a complete silence. The Japanese, especially the Japanese, maintained a complete silence because this bombing of the destruction, the complete wiping out of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had brought about the sudden defeat of Japan in the Second World War. Many fugitives had fled from Hiroshima. People started running away from the place of disaster, Hiroshima, to seek safety with their families. Well, their first-hand descriptions of the horror were profoundly disquieting. Well, it gives us a lot of discomfort, profoundly disquieting. It makes us uncomfortable. The blinding light, the light that would make the light that came out of the explosion, it was blinding. Suddenly flashing out of the peaceful sky was a phenomenon much more horrible than an earthquake. Well, it was really horrible. Earthquake is one of the terrible experiences in human life. Well, this particular incident was more horrible than an earthquake. It was a typhoon. It was just a storm, a terrible storm of glare, blinding light, heat, wind. All these 3 things together: blinding light, glare, heat, and wind, that had swept suddenly over the earth and left a sea of fire behind it. So light, heat, wind, and fire. The total number of deaths was not actually recorded. Well, nobody knew exactly how many people died. Junod got a telegram that morning mentioning the acute seriousness of the situation. When he reached Hiroshima, well, the higher officials explained in detail about the crisis. The officials told him about the crisis, the gravity of the situation. Junod was assisted by 2 Japanese interpreters. There were people to help him with the language. The Japanese interpreters told him about the past and the present of Hiroshima. I know how was Hiroshima before the blast, and what exactly is the condition of Hiroshima now after the blast. The bombing of Hiroshima on the 6th of August, the tremor, the trembling, the quake, and the smoke, well, the entire incident shook everybody, shook everyone. All of them ran. People started running for their life. Every living thing, every living organism, that is, human beings, animals, and the plants and trees, everything was petrified. They turned into stone. The vegetation, the plants and trees, turned into ashes. Trees They went up in flames. They started burning. Rice plants, the paddy field, lost their greenness. They were burned and they became turned gray. The grass burnt on the ground like a dry straw. And up to about 3 miles from the center of the explosion, well, lightly built houses, they were flattened, completely collapsed. Those who were inside those lightly built houses, they were either killed or they were wounded. Those who managed to escape, some people thought they have escaped, but those who managed to escape by some miracle, they found themselves surrounded by rings of fire. People were burning for their life, but they found themselves, surrounded by rings of fire. The few who thought were safe, some people considered themselves to be safe. They thought they were safe, but they died 20 or 30 days later from the delayed effects of the gamma rays, the gamma rays that came out of the explosion, the bombs. Some of the reinforced concrete buildings, there were a few reinforced, concrete structures. They remained standing. Well, some remnants, like, a part of the wall, a portion of the wall, and things like things like that, they were standing. But their interiors, you know, the things that were inside were completely burnt, gutted by the blast. When the writer, when Marcel Junod went to visit the place, well, a few soldiers were clearing the debris, the scattered pieces left after the disaster. A few soldiers were clearing the debris. Only little grasses were sprouting amidst the ruins. He could find a few, grasses amidst the ruins. He thought, well, this is the life that is left after the huge explosion, after the first ever bombing in the history of mankind, Hiroshima. And this might be the everlasting hope of humanity. This is what he says, Marcel Junod, the famous humanitarian doctor, says about the incident. Let's come to the short answer questions. Question number one: why did Junod's American friends refused to utter the word Japan? Because they were traveling on an aircraft. They were going to Hiroshima. Well, they were just looking at each other, saying nothing. They didn't dare. They didn't dare to utter the word Japan, because when a tragedy occurs, at the site of a tragedy, a catastrophe, nobody says anything. They just look at each other without saying anything. So it was in the context of the bombing, the bombardment of Hiroshima, that Junod's American friends refused to utter the word Japan, because the bombing of Hiroshima made an indefinable sense of discomfort. It would make everybody uncomfortable. Yes, a sort of discomfort that you don't like to express. You cannot express. Indefinable, something that cannot be defined. A sense of discomfort. Question number two: why do you think the Japanese were silent on the disaster? Why Japanese didn't say? Because it brought about their sudden defeat. The nuclear attacks on Japan, the twin attacks on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, brought a terrible calamity. Oh, it was, it destroyed, it broke the backbone of Japan, brought a terrible calamity, and it brought about their sudden defeat, the sudden defeat of Japan. And it was for this reason that the Japanese maintained complete silence. Question number three: why, according to Colonel Sams, was it impossible for the US to organize direct relief work in Hiroshima? Why couldn't the US organize relief work? Because the relief work was the responsibility of the International Committee of the Red Cross. That's the reason. It was impossible for the US. It was impossible for the US to organize direct relief work in Hiroshima, because the control and responsibility of the rescue operations, the rescue work, was handed over to the International Committee of the Red Cross. Now, what did the remnants of the wall signify? Well, something was saying, something remained. A portion of a concrete wall remained there. Now, what did it signify? What is the significance of that remaining portion of the wall, remnant of the wall? Everything in Hiroshima was destroyed in the nuclear attack. Junod was shown a wall, a portion of a wall, by Professor Suzuki, saying that a hospital had existed there before the attack. There was a huge building, a hospital building. Well, the entire building collapsed in the bombing, which resulted in the death of every patient. Thousands of patients were inside the hospital, doctors and nurses. Well, this is the significance of that remnant of the wall, a portion of the wall that remained after the bombing of Hiroshima. Here are the paragraph questions. Well, question number 1. How does the journalist describe the fatal day? The journalist, gives a description of that day, that fatal day or on which the Hiroshima was bombarded. The journalist gave a detailed description of Hiroshima on the 6th of August. 4 American B-29 planes appeared in the sky in the morning. 4 planes appeared in the sky over Hiroshima in the morning. There was a glaring light. A glaring light was visible in the sky, accompanied by an unnatural tremor. Everything started shaking, a tremor. It was followed by, a light and a tremor, which was followed by a wave of suffocating heat. So there was light, there was a tremor, and heat and wind, which swept away everything in its path. Now, within a few seconds, they saw this. They saw this unnatural phenomenon, a glaring light, an unnatural tremor, suffocating wind, and heat, terrible heat. Within a few seconds, the thousands of people on the streets and the gardens, they were burned. They were singed by a wave of heat. Many were killed instantly. Others lay writhing and squirming on the ground, screaming in agony. People were crying. Everything that stood upright, whatever that stood in the way of the blast, everything was destroyed. Trams, trains, and buses, they were picked up and tossed aside like toys. They were thrown out, they were thrown away. Animals and vegetation suffered the same fate as humans. Nothing was left. Hiroshima had ceased to exist. That was what happened after the city was bombed. Now, Hiroshima bombings are a poignant reminder to the destructive use of science and technology. The darker side of science and technology. Science is good or bad? Science is it a blessing or is it a curse? The curse side, the darker side of science and technology. Well, discuss. In a uranium bomb, it was a uranium bomb that was dropped over Hiroshima on the 6th of August 1945. It had an explosive yield, an explosive power equal to about 15,000 tons of TNT. That was the power of the uranium bomb that was dropped on over Hiroshima. That bomb razed and burned around 70% of all the buildings. And it caused an estimated 140,000 deaths by the end of 1945 in 1 year. So the incident occurred, the bombing occurred in August, September, October, November, December. Well, by the end of 1945, about 140,000 people were killed. It also caused increased rates of cancer and chronic disease, permanent disability diseases among the survivors, the people who lived, who survived, who were living after the incident. Well, they suffered later. They died later on. They died from cancer and other chronic diseases. Well, nuclear age had begun with a terrible fury. 66,000 people died instantly on the spot. and thousands were injured. Additional thousands later succumbed to radiation poisoning. 4 square miles of the city were instantly wiped out, erased. The scientists who made the little boy and the fat man, remember, the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima was nicknamed Little Boy, and the bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki was nicknamed Fat Man. The Little Boy and the Fat Man, the 2 bombs, suffer from the guilt. The scientists who made the 2 bombs, they feel themselves guilty for bringing the world into a nuclear age. Well, it caused nothing other than unimaginable loss and suffering to humanity. That is the net result of the bombing. Question number 3. Describe Hiroshima after the bombings. Now, what Hiroshima looked like after the bombing. About half an hour after the explosion, the sky all around Hiroshima was still cloudless. After the explosion, it was still there were no clouds in the sky over Hiroshima. There was a little rain. A fine rain started to fall on the town after the incident, and it continued for about 5 minutes. The rain continued for about 5 minutes. That rain was caused by the sudden rise of the overheated air to a great height. The overheated air went to a great height, and where in the height in the sky it condensed, the heat condensed and fell back as rain. Then a violent wind rose and fires. So rain, wind, fire extended with terrible rapidity, terrible speed, because most Japanese houses were built of timber and straw, and only traces of the foundations and piles of debris and rusty, charred ironwork, charred black burnt steel were left. Everything had disappeared. It was a stony waste. It was a mountain of stone, a stony waste, littered with debris and twisted girders, twisted, steel beams. By evening, the fire began to die down. There was nothing left. There was nothing left to burn. Hiroshima had ceased to exist. There was no Hiroshima. It was completely flattened. Question number 4. Well, General Macarthur, the supreme commander of the Allied forces, this is what he said after the incident. The supreme value of human life and human blood has been forgotten, and human dignity too. The value of human life, the value of human blood, and the value of human dignity, these things were forgotten in the incident. Now, what made him say so? Even though he was a professional soldier, he was very much moved by the incident. And he says, well, this is not the answer. This is not the way that, quarrels. This is not the way that the misunderstandings should be cleared, that quarrels should be settled. It should be, by peaceful means. This is what he says. General Macarthur, the supreme commander of the Allied forces, he was addressing the delegates of the International Red Cross, the International Committee of the Red Cross. Even though he was a professional soldier, he spoke about the value and dignity of human life. He also spoke about the use of force, which was against his professional character. Even though he was a professional soldier, he says this is against his professional character. MacArthur clearly said that peace still lay far ahead in future. Well, peace has not been achieved. There was too much destruction. There was too much physical exhaustion in the war. There would not be another war during the next 20 or 25 years. Another world war, if there is another, because this was Second World War. Think of a third world war would leave nothing worthy of mention, or nothing would be left on the earth after another war like this. He felt sad. He felt sorry. He regretted that there was so little chance of achieving peace in the world. How can we achieve peace in the world? It's very difficult, isn't it? Macarthur expresses concern and anguish for the sacrifice of human life and above all, human dignity, the dignity of man. Now here is an essay based on uh, Marcel Junod's first atom bomb. The deadly Hiroshima bombings are the worst man-made disaster in the history of mankind. Discuss. Well, here's the first introductory paragraph. In the essay, the first atom bomb, Marcel Junod, the Swiss doctor, gives a graphic first-hand account of the dropping of the first ever nuclear bomb on Hiroshima. It relates, it discusses, it describes the horrific incidents that killed 80,000 people instantly, wiped out 90% of the city, Hiroshima, and exposed generations of people to harmful effects of radiation. This is the introduction. Paragraph number 2. Hiroshima. Now, what was Hiroshima? What was Hiroshima before the atomic bombardment? Why did the US select Hiroshima for the first bombing? Because it was the backbone. It was a very very busy hub. It was the economic hub of Japan. It was the commercial capital of Japan. It was a manufacturing center. Some 350,000 people. That was the population, 350,000 people. So, at one go, just to drop a bomb, you can kill 350,000 people. Located about 500 miles from Tokyo, it was selected as the first target. The 9,000 pound, that was the weight of the bomb, uranium-235 bomb, aboard where? Carried by a modified B-29 plane. So it was loaded on a B-29 plane. What kind of a bomb? A uranium-235 bomb. The weight of the bomb was 9,000 pounds. Was dropped by parachute at 8:15 in the morning of August 6th, the 6th of August 1945. Well, the bomb didn't explode on the land, on the surface of the earth. No, it exploded 2,000 feet above Hiroshima to give the maximum, maximum destruction, to cause maximum destruction. So 2,000 feet above Hiroshima, above the city of Hiroshima, it was exploded in the atmosphere, in the air. When Japan refused to surrender, well, another deadly bomb. So after Hiroshima, well, Japan was still fighting its backbone. The US felt that its backbone was not broken. So it dropped another deadly bomb, the Fat Man. The first bomb was nicknamed the Little Boy, and the second was nicknamed the Fat Man. It was dropped on Nagasaki, paving the way for, well, that brought about the end of Japan. Japan surrendered. It paved the way for Japan's immediate surrender in the war. The paragraph number 3. On the 6th of August 1945, 4 American B-29 planes appeared in the morning sky over Hiroshima. Now, the incident is described, a description of the incident. Then, 4 planes appeared. There was a glaring whitish pinkish light, a mixture of white and pink. Whitish pinkish light appeared in the sky, accompanied by an unnatural tremor, a shake. Everything was trembling, everything was shaking. So people might have thought it was an earthquake. A wave of suffocating heat suddenly appeared, and heat and wind, swept away everything in its path. Within a few seconds, the thousands of people who were on the streets and the gardens, they were severely burned by a wave of terrible heat. Many were killed instantly, on the spot. People were killed. Others, those who were not killed on the spot, they lay there, writhing and squirming on the ground, screaming, crying for help in agony. Everything was flattened. Trams and trains and buses were thrown off like toys. Every living thing was petrified, turned into a stone. Hiroshima had ceased to exist. An unnatural earthquake and a heat wave swept Hiroshima. People were twisting and shrieking from pain. Those who escaped found themselves in a ring of fire. People were running for life, and they found themselves surrounded by rings of fire and were burned to ashes. Those who did not die immediately, well, they died 20 or 30 days later from the effects of the gamma rays that came from the bomb. Well, General Macarthur, Supreme Commander of the Allied Forces, said that peace, well, it didn't bring about peace. Peace still lay far ahead in future. It was a distant dream. There had been too much destruction, he says, too much destruction and a physical exhaustion in the war. He remarked that force was not a solution to human problems. War had not brought about permanent peace. War will not bring about peace. Well, which could be won? Peace could be won through friendly discussion and understanding among nations. Well, this is the way to establish a peace, discussion, friendly discussions. And here is the concluding paragraph. Well, the first atom bomb by Marcel Junod. It gives a heart-rending account of the worst calamity in human history. The essay reveals Marcel Junod's deep sympathy for the casualties, he hates brutal wars, and his anxiety for the posterity, for the future generations. He's very, very much, what is going to happen? Well, if this is what happens in 1945, well, people are inventing more destructive, more powerful weapons. Now, what is going to happen? What is the fate? What is the future like? His anxiety for our posterity in the light of the emergence of more deadly modern weapon systems. Now, he is very much worried. He is very much anxious about the future. And this is the end of Marcel Junod's essay, The First Atom Bomb. Look at, the what the happened at the moment of explosion. Well, this is the first picture, and after the explosion, after the bomb, the little boy was dropped on Hiroshima. Well, it looked like Hiroshima looked like the second picture. So this is the end of our discussion of the essay, The First Atom Bomb, by the famous Swiss doctor, humanitarian Dr. Marcel Junod. Thank you very much.